Hello, y'all. It is Sunday, July 14th, and it is Throwing Light. I am LTJ Reeds. I am your host. And if you're not throwing light, you're not acting right. All right, y'all. We got a special topic and a special guest on tonight. We have got Ziibi, and we're going to be talking about two spirit visibility. Before we get started, remember to go over to astralatx.org, learn about what they do for our community, and donate to their food bank if you can. All right, Ziibi, you ready? How you doing? Welcome. Lone Star Pup
Oh,
2022, y'all. Lone Star Pup 2022. That's actually where
that's right.
I met you at Austin Kink Weekend 2023. Well, did we
Yeah.
met before? Did we meet before then?
I do
I've been
not
talking,
believe
I think,
that
but
we
that's when
really interacted.
we physically met for the first time at Austin Kink Weekend.
I
Yeah,
think you were on my radar before I was on yours, for
yeah.
sure.
I wasn't even on
Being a
I wasn't
contestant.
even on my radar, so I don't know.
So yeah, so
Let's
I
tell
go
the
by many
people who
names.
are what's going on.
Yeah, so I go by actually a few different names. So my legal name is Brian Garcia, and I have no problems with ever being that public for all the things that I do. I feel like there's a certain amount of efficacy comes from me being so public with my name and in being forward facing in that way. So you can find me online under Brian Garcia, but also ZB is a given name by the head of my leather house. I am a proud patch member of the House of Iron. We are a large indigenous leather house, which there's not many of us. Overall American population, there's only about 3% of us in the general population, so it's a pretty small pool. Much less for leather or kink or BDSM. That's an even smaller kind of percentage. But yeah, so I live in San Antonio. So I also go by Puck, which is how most people know me. But ZD's my house given name. And so yeah, I do identify as a what you would call a two-spirit or an IndigiQueer person, and there's a lot to unpack around what that term is. So if y'all would be willing to go with me on a little journey, because it's interesting just how much of an intimate connection uh the term two-spirit has with the language, with our language within used within queer spaces. It's really interesting how it is so intimately tied to wider conversations within gender expression. Like a lot of things, this term is somewhat relatively new and actually only got coined in 1990. Before that, the term that was used by a lot of anthropologists or writers on it, because right, so a lot of this conversation, to give y'all context, is going to be as an indigenous person, and then there's a lot of conversation that comes from outside of that pool. Well, two other groups, one being if you have an intimate relation with a tribal council or within your native practices, that's one heavily weighed viewpoint that's going to have a lot of input on what we're going to discuss. And then also the people outside of us that kind of study us like animals. A lot of the writers of Native American studies, a lot of the people that, have basically, yeah, studied us throughout American history. A lot of the historians and anthropologists, they have a large view as well that's very much always seeped in these ideas of colonialism, which is also a huge theme that comes up over and over and over again. But so yeah, before that, there was this term called before 1990, the term was called bear dash, and it was kind of a slur. It actually came from a French word that of the same pronunciation, and that meant more of either a boy prostitute or a passive homosexual. And that actually came from a Persian word, barda, which meant like slave or prisoner of war. So for prior to 1990, anybody that was considered a gender differing identifying individual was all lumped under this idea of bear dash. And usually, whenever it was being written about, or whenever it was used out in society and it was being discussed, you were usually talking about a male, or a male homosexual, a bisexual, or somebody that was just overly effeminate. And it really did, even though it was being written about in all these academic journals and whatnot, it really was a slur, of the highest kind. Sometimes it would be used for lesbian, and then it also lumped intersex into it. So another thing, because all about themes that with this story of how Two Spirit came to be is this idea of us all kind of being lumped under a word, and sometimes it's a word that we chose, sometimes it was a word that was placed on us. So Verdash was before 1990. 1990 comes around, and then we have the third annual International Native American First Nations Gay and Lesbian American Conference. My goodness, long title. And that happened up in Winnipeg. There were about 5 conferences, and the last one of them was this third annual intertribal meeting up in Winnipeg, where they finally got together and actually coined the term Two Spirit. So Two Spirit, that conference was also on Ojibwe land. And so Two Spirit was an English word that was created to start to try to connect those that felt different, not only queer, but also a sort of non-binary or transness within the community, to have a separate term to finally start to reclaim a lot of what had been lost, whether or not it was through the history of the American reservation system, or in Canada, the residential schools where they snatched up the native children and put them out in these schools, and they cut their hair, wouldn't let them sing their songs, they converted them to Christianity. A lot of the times they died, they were buried in these mass graves. So depending on how it was to reclaim a lot of what the previous centuries worth of trauma had been placed upon the people. So that we get this term Two Spirit. It was because the conference was on Ojibwe land. It was translated into Anishinaabe, and that's Nish Manitwag. That's how you pronounce it. It was translated into that language, but we very quickly see that this kind of starts to have kind of a rippling effect of how we then took that term and then started to apply it to us within our own communities, right? So, like within Cherokee, automatically, was Sagali, which is our native tongue. There's 5 different genders at a certain point, and they all use a different varying way that you're looking at it, and then whether or not it's singular or plural. It doesn't easily fit within what the language was for you to say Two Spirit. There's not a way of saying it, and you see that a lot through a lot of North America as soon as this term was coined. It wasn't intended to really replace any of the traditional terms or concepts that certain tribes had already had. But so after that, it was used to help distance this idea of queerness from natives and non-natives. It was meant to be a term that non-natives were not able to really share in helping us kind of find a pathway for a community for ourselves. But that was the original idea. Now, also within this, when you look at a lot of specific cultures that did have a specific term or a specific role for a two-spirit person or for somebody that was gender non-conforming, that's exactly what it was. It was a role. So you either have ceremonial or spiritual roles, and a lot of the times those needed to be, I guess, assigned by a council, by elders. It wasn't something that you could necessarily claim on yourself. So as this term two-spirit is starting to kind of take over, you remember 1990 as well. That was a very different context for queer rights. We were at the height of the AIDS epidemic. We were looking at queer rights from a very, very different point of view, as we do now in 2024. So whenever this term came out there, a lot of people loved it. A lot of people felt like it started to actually deteriorate at the idea of um, local regional tribal ceremonial practices, that it made what they call pan-Indian, where you're now lumping all 450, 500 native tongues that we have into one group of Native American, instead of really honoring the individual culture of Cree, of Ojibwe, of Cherokee, of Blackfoot. Because not all those different cultures had the same ideas. Not all of them, if they did have a two-spirit role, were always kind to that. So you see a lot of conflict over whether or not whether or not two-spirit was going to be adopted. Um, uh, because if there was a role, then there was a local language in that was able to better define, I guess, what that person was to that community, versus now using a large term to kind of include us all. But regardless of any of that conversation, many of us that do use the term two-spirit still, what you ended up running in with since then, is also this idea of modern natives, just everyday natives, that straight, that don't agree with I guess, queer representation either. A lot of that comes from, Christian conversion, again, like what I said with I mean, in Mexico, you had the Spaniards when they came over, and they erased a lot of queer existence within Mesoamerican cultures. You had the reservation system that demolished that set up everything that we have here in America, and then you have the residential schools in Canada that all kind of place this Christian view after we had been decimated, after we were put on our reservations, after all of the local our identity had been stolen. There was a large conversion to Christianity. In modern times, what that's resulted in is, even if you didn't, once you get outside of the academic viewpoints on whether or not two-spirit is a valid role to call yourself, or a label to call yourself, there's also this pushback from just regular families, because they don't recognize even what was in our culture pre-Christianity. It's kind of been washed out of our I guess, culture. So like me specifically, with my grandmother, she came out of Oklahoma and kind of married up. She married a white man, blonde hair, blue eyes, to kind of escape the life that she had in Oklahoma. And so whenever it comes to a lot of practices and whatnot, for me, there wasn't like a whole lot to hold on to. And so whenever I'm started my journey, whenever I was in my teens, and now where I am, a lot of it was not being able to reach out to immediate family, because all of that had kind of been washed out. I mean, there was a reason why those practices were left behind, which is really, really sad now. But 100 years ago, they did not believe that. I mean, the idea was not the same. So anyway, you see a lot of conflict over the idea of two-spirit, and how it's used, depending on where it's coming from. One cool thing, though, is that around 2004, for the Vancouver Queer Festival, we have a guy named TJ Cuthlan, who coined this term, IndigiQueer, which is something that we also use nowadays, and that seems to have avoided a lot of the other issues that two-spirit had, I guess, caused for some people. Now, it's by far the widest used term for gender nonconforming within a native context still. You see it so many times on 2S LGBTQIA plus. You see it as part of the alphabet. And so by far in terms of its use, it is the widest term that we know identifies a native queer individual. But there's definitely a lot of different terms that you can use, and we're still working it out. I mean, so this was what, 1990? So I mean, that was 1 year younger than me. I am as old as this term is, and I certainly don't have all of my stuff figured out. So the way that 2S is still used in context, it's a very young term. It's a very young concept of trying to reclaim the native queer identity and what it used to mean, its rightful place within our system. But there's a lot of talk about it, and whether or not that's I mean, it matches a lot of how I started, what I said in the very beginning. It matches a lot of conversations that we've seen in other spaces around gender identity and uh, elsewhere. What we call ourselves, who agrees with it, who says that it's okay for us to call us that, ourselves that, what does that mean, recognition from other people. So it's a very, very similar story to a lot of what we see in transness and non-binary, in any of the agender, in any of the other gender identities that we have. It's a very, very interesting conversation. It just has its own flavor on how it developed. So that's my that's my TED talk on the term, at least. Um, there's a lot of ways that it's used in
What's the
really
full,
important ways.
what's the
Hmm?
full acronym now? It's LGBTQIA. Then is it 2S? What is it?
Well, so in Canada they put 2S at the beginning because we're
Oh,
native and we were here first,
interesting.
which is a valid argument.
Yeah.
But
So
Canada has a much more intimate relationship with their native communities than we do.
how do you find do you find it hard you know trying to maintain your identity and your queerness through your heritage difficult, like especially being here in Texas where they're not very tolerant of other cultures, you know what I'm saying? Does that make it more difficult to be understood?
For me, I'm a weird bug, and so I don't say necessarily for me, but I don't really, I kind of have I give no F's about it attitude to begin with. I will say that nowadays, with the ascension of technology and being able to interact, and then obviously having gotten to meet a leather family, and being adopted by them, and becoming a member, that is not something, because I've been in the community for 15 years. So 15 years ago, this is not a world that I would have ever have thought of. And I mean, I was in a lot of spaces, queer spaces, like at the National Leather Association convention in Oklahoma City. I was in a lot of indigenous, like land that was heavily indigenous, but there was so few within those spaces to really find that sense of kinship um, or interaction. Do I find it hard to be understood? Um, Not because of my heritage, I don't think. I think that I'm pretty lucky uh to be taken at face value. I surround myself with really incredible people. Um and I don't really waste my time with nonsense. And so I'm pretty, I guess, insulated within. I mean, I know that there are points of view outside of that aren't as kind, but take it with a grain of salt. Just I always try to go outside, touch grass, and really, be grab something that's real, instead of, because most of that, I mean, if there are haters, most of that's online, and that's really easy to just kind of turn off. You know, tech companies give you a block button because they want to empower you to use it. So, you know, consent and all that stuff, don't, it's your body, your choice. Don't be around that kind of attitude if you don't want to.
So, what are ways that we can help the community be exposed to, more two spirit culture? What are ways for us to get involved and to know, to make effort, to understand, how, being IndigiQueer is it's a real thing. It's a vibe. Um you
Well,
know
it's who we are. I mean, it's something that we are. It's not really something that you choose. Like a lot of things, I guess. Obviously didn't get to choose my heritage or whatnot. I could just got to choose whether or not to accept it and embrace it, or to not. So I'm very lucky in that. But ways that people can help be allies to Two Spirit visibility and the Two Spirit community. The IndigiQueer community is really make sure that you know that they're allowed in all BIPOC spaces. I feel like there's that I within that acronym that's very oftentimes kind of gets overlooked. Um, I think that it's something that I see happen actually more north, like with the communities around Michigan or Ohio or even in Canada. I see that become a bigger conversation than what we deal with down here. But making sure that they're always invited into their spaces, and that people know that they have a wider community, because we're such a small section, that we're included in a wider conversation, with that. Also, making sure that you do land acknowledgments for every event, or organization that you're a part of. Really taking about 30 seconds out at the beginning of any large event that you do, just to recognize the lands that you're on that used to belong to a different set of peoples, making sure you list a general set of the different peoples of your local, no matter where you are. Taking that time out really does go a long way. I know that there's definitely some that don't agree that land acknowledgements, because I don't want to speak for everybody. I know that there's those that don't agree with land acknowledgements being enough action. So in that case, I would say also get involved in activism. Even if it's once a year, hey, I'll take it. With whenever it comes to, Native American Heritage Month, or whenever it comes to, National Native American Day, or any of these little holidays and whatnot. Because Canada has their own, uh, just any type of time that you can actually donate to a cause. I'll say that for House of Iron, our biggest fundraisers go to MMIW G2S activism, which means murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit people. Usually it's MMIW. That's how you'll see it, is murdered and missing Indigenous women. It's a huge cause. That's why if you ever see a red handprint, that's kind of the sign of the activism. Yeah, a red hand print over a mouth. And so what we do is really help. Right now there's situations up in Canada where there was a known killer who dumped women's bodies off in a landfill, and the families wanted to reclaim those bodies. They had been told where they were and everything, but it's was this bit, oh, there's all this red tape over the local area about letting them in to be able to search for these girls, being able to make sure that they have networks where these people don't just go off and die. um, there's you've seen with Next Benedict, um, back in February, from Oklahoma, the little non-binary kid that who they claimed he was Two Spirit, so, or they were Two Spirit. So there's a lot of hate and I guess violence that comes around of our communities, especially whenever you're closer to a reservation. The whole idea is that American citizens can come onto a reservation and commit crime, commit murder, commit rape, can do all these things, and because that's technically not American land, they are not easily able to be prosecuted or found. There's all this red tape between different kinds of authorities, protective authorities, and whose jurisdiction it is. And so that's why you really see a lot of our women and our queer individuals be the targets and end up dead. So that's one of the biggest fundraisers and causes that I'm particularly involved with. And so if you're one of those individuals that isn't a big fan of land acknowledgements and doesn't think it means enough, then ask somebody to put their money where their mouth is and donate to an Indigenous cause, an Indigenous small business. Actually show that you're doing something other than just acknowledging our space. Those are definitely ways to be allies. I mean, in general, support, acknowledge, and speak up. So that's just allyship in general. But
Phoebe, I appreciate this has been a very informative, very amazing interview. Before we close up, I always ask every
yeah, I hope you bring me back on again. I hope you bring me back on again.
like I said, there are things that we need to touch. Like it would be I'd be missing the point of what I'm doing if I just like, oh, I've touched you and that's it. No, this is an ongoing conversation and it needs more. And I'm willing
Most
to be
definitely.
there to help, amplify that conversation. So you got me here for that, okay? Uh
Yeah, and as a native, I would love to discuss what's happening on my homeland right now.
I will back. Let's talk after this show and we'll talk about getting you back on. But before you go, is there any aspect of our community that you think we have not been shedding light on that we need to shed light on? Besides what we talked about tonight.
I really think that Gen Z interaction, Gen Z involvement, I think that it's something that I am fascinated by all the time. I think a lot of it comes from, I mean, obviously my home pack here in San Antonio, the SAC pack, the San Antonio Kennel Club. You can find out more about that at SA Kennel Club, club with a K.org. They're so much younger, and I mean, obviously you have to be 18 and up, but so many of our events are 21 and up, and so I have to deal with 18 to 21-year-olds, and then 21 to about 30. It's just a very different understand. They're introduced to leather in a different way. We have a vastly different way, and for a lot of good reasons, we have more education. I think our understanding of what they need, who they are, and how they're participating in our spaces is a really cool topic. Um, Really cool topic. So yeah, our young little baby queers in the community that are just new, talking about their stories and their perceptions of the community, I think are very good because yeah, it's an experience. It's their trip.
Well, that is well. I mean, I'm all about here to do everything I possibly can. We got to start doing like a multi-topic episode. We will do that. All right. Well,
Yeah.
TB, my friend, that brings us towards the end of tonight, y'all. And thank you again for watching this. This ends summer school.
I have to show my beadwork real quick
Oh,
that
there
my
you go.
brother Wasgo Onyx from Kentucky made me. So for IPTC. Thank you, Wasgo. Love you, Bubba.
Remember, y'all, if you're not throwing light, you're not acting right. See y'all next
You're
Sunday.
not acting right.